The sliding automatic doors of the St. Jude Memorial ER hissed open, admitting a blast of cold city air and the frantic rhythm of a rolling gurney. Samuel Johnson lay atop the thin mattress, his chest heaving in shallow, jagged rasps that sounded like dry leaves skittering over pavement. His skin was gray, masked by layers of city soot and the grime of a man who had long been forgotten by the world above. Standing at the central nursing station, Dr. Andrew Miller didn't even look up from his tablet. He was too busy adjusting the silk knot of his tie in the reflection of a darkened monitor, ensuring his appearance matched the prestige of his title. He glanced at his digital schedule. A lunch meeting with the surgical board was only 20 minutes away, before his eyes finally flicked toward the commotion. He didn't see a man in respiratory distress. He saw a liability. He saw a dirty statistic that would clutter his wing and provide no return on the hospital's expensive resources. "Doctor, he's crashing," a paramedic shouted, pushing the gurney toward the trauma bay. "Pulse is thready, breath sounds are diminished on the left." Miller took a deliberate, slow step back, his face tightening into a mask of professional annoyance. He didn't move toward the patient. Instead, he checked his reflection one last time, smoothing back a stray hair with a manicured hand. "Put him in bed Miller said, his voice cold and dismissive. "The hallway bed. And don't bother with a full workup yet. He looks like a chronic case of neglect. He can wait until I've cleared the more urgent appointments." Samuel's hand reached out, trembling, his fingers clutching at the air as if trying to grab a thread of hope. His eyes, clouded but piercingly intelligent, searched Miller's face for a glimmer of recognition or mercy. Miller simply looked away, his brow furrowed in a display of tense unease as he focused on a socialite's chart across the room. That was when Emily Parker moved. While the doctor retreated into the safety of his schedule, Emily stepped into the chaos. She didn't flinch at the smell of the streets or the dirt under Samuel's fingernails. She met his gaze, her posture gentle and attentive, and placed a firm, reassuring hand on his forearm. "I've got you, sir," she whispered, her voice a calm anchor in the sterile storm. "You're not invisible to me." As she leaned over him, a subtle, warm glow glinted from the pocket of her light blue scrubs, a hidden light that seemed to pulse in time with the old man's struggling heart. Samuel's eyes locked onto hers, a flicker of profound trust passing between them. He wasn't just a patient anymore. He was a king being tended to by his only loyal subject, while the man sworn to save him walked toward the exit without looking back. The transition from the chaos of the intake to the stagnant air of the hallway felt like a demotion of the soul. True to Dr. Miller's orders, Samuel's gurney was shoved against the scuffed baseboards of the corridor, far from the high-tech monitors and the watchful eyes of the central station. Dr. Miller walked past bed 4 once more, his pace brisk, his eyes fixed on the door of the VIP lounge. He didn't stop to check Samuel's oxygen saturation. He didn't even pause to see if the man was still breathing. To Miller, the elderly man was merely a temporary obstruction in the hallway of his career. "He's still struggling to breathe, Dr. Miller," Emily said, her voice tight with a courage she didn't know she possessed. She stood her ground as Miller swept by, forcing him to halt. "His vitals are dropping. We need to move him to a stabilization room and start in 4-line immediately." Miller stopped, but he didn't turn his body toward the patient. He looked over his shoulder, his expression one of sharp, professional condescension. "Nurse Parker, I believe I gave you a directive. We have a limited number of trauma bays, and I am expecting a donor's relative any minute with a suspected fracture. We don't waste resources on lost causes who have likely lived on the streets for a decade. He's stable enough for the hallway. Keep him quiet and don't get too attached." "He isn't a lost cause," Emily countered, her hand tightening on the railing of Samuel's bed. "He's a human being." Miller let out a short, dry laugh, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "In this ER, Emily, people are triage levels. He is a level 5. If he's still here when I get back from my meeting, we'll consider a basic panel. Until then, do your job and stay in your lane." He turned on his heel, the crisp white fabric of his coat fluttering like a flag of surrender to his own ego. Emily stood in the wake of his dismissal, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked down at Samuel. He was watching her, his face lined with 70 years of experience, his hands clasped together over the thin hospital gown. He wasn't angry. He looked as if he were studying her, evaluating her response to the doctor's cruelty. "Don't mind him," Emily whispered, leaning down so only Samuel could hear. "He sees numbers." "I see you." She reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing against the cold, heavy metal of the object Samuel had slipped to her moments before, a piece of evidence that suggested this lost cause was far more than he appeared. With a defiant look toward the retreating back of Dr. Miller, Emily began to pull the privacy curtain around the hallway bed, creating a makeshift sanctuary. If the doctor wouldn't give him a room, she would give him a kingdom. The privacy curtain hissed shut, sealing the hallway bed off from the clinical indifference of the hospital. Inside this small, fabric-walled sanctuary, the harsh fluorescent lights seemed to soften. Emily didn't head for the supply closet to grab the standard-issue plastic basin. Instead, she went to the maternity ward to fetch the thick, premium cotton towels and a basin of steaming water infused with calming lavender oil, supplies usually reserved for the diamond-tier patients. As she returned, she found Samuel watching her, his eyes focused and alert despite his physical frailty. There was a quiet dignity in the way he held himself, a stillness that commanded respect. "They'll write you up for using those," Samuel rasped, his voice a low, melodic rumble that sounded like deep water over stones. Emily didn't hesitate. She dipped a cloth into the warm water and began to gently wash the soot from his weathered forehead. "Let them," she replied softly. "No one should have to feel the weight of the world on their skin while they're trying to heal." She worked with a meticulous, reverent grace, cleaning his hands as if she were performing a sacred ritual. As the layers of grime disappeared, she noticed the details Dr. Miller had been too arrogant to see. The neatly trimmed beard beneath the surface dirt, the absence of tremors in his steady hands, and the way he carried himself with the posture of a man accustomed to being heard. When she moved to wash his right hand, she felt him stiffen slightly. As she wiped away the dust, she saw it, a tan line on his ring finger, deep and distinct, as if he had worn a heavy band of gold for decades and only recently removed it. "You're not who they think you are you, Samuel?" she asked, her voice a mere whisper. Samuel didn't answer immediately. He looked at her, his gaze heavy with a secret that seemed to vibrate in the air between them. He reached out with his clean hand and touched the edge of Emily's scrub pocket, where the small, glowing object sat heavy. "The world sees what it wants to see, Emily," he said, his voice stronger now, carrying an unmistakable authority. "Dr. Miller sees a shadow. You see a soul. In a few hours, the world is going to change for both of you. Tell me, why do you stay in a place that tries so hard to break your heart?" Emily paused, the warm towel draped over her hand. "Because if I leave," she said firmly, "then the shadows win." A faint, knowing smile touched Samuel's lips. He closed his eyes, leaning back into the pillows she had fluffed for him. For the first time since he had arrived, his breathing slowed into a steady, peaceful rhythm. He looked less like a patient in a hallway and more like a monarch resting in his private chambers, while outside the curtain, the man who thought he was in charge continued to walk blindly toward his own ruin. The silence behind the curtain was a stark contrast to the sterile clatter of the ER outside. Samuel beckoned Emily closer, his strength seemingly rallying from the simple act of being treated with humanity. He looked toward the gap in the curtain, ensuring Dr. Miller was nowhere in sight, before his gaze returned to Emily with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "This hospital," Samuel began, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hum, "was built on a promise made 50 years ago. It wasn't built for the board members in their high-back chairs, or for men like Miller who treat medicine like a stock market." Emily paused, her hand hovering over the basin. "Most people think it was founded by a conglomerate, Samuel. The Johnson Miller Group." Samuel let out a soft, dry chuckle that turned into a wheeze. The Miller in that name was Andrew's grandfather, a man of immense skill but even greater ego. "My father was the Johnson. He was the one who provided the heart and the capital. But over the decades, the Millers pushed the Johnsons out. They turned a sanctuary into a business. They forgot the secret of the foundation. He reached out, his calloused fingers trembling as he touched the fabric of Emily's pocket. Inside that pocket is the only remaining founder's ring. It's more than gold, Emily. It's a key. The original bylaws of this hospital state that the majority shareholder can dissolve the board at any time if the spirit of care is found to be dead. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. She felt the weight of the glowing object, the ring, pressing against her thigh. Why are you telling me this? Why are you here like this? Samuel's eyes softened, reflecting the trust and vulnerability of a man who had spent months planning this final test. Because power is a blindfold. I needed to see if the heart of this place was truly gone, or if it was just buried under the paperwork. I spent 3 hours in that waiting room, Emily. 12 nurses walked past me. 4 doctors looked through me. You were the only one who stopped to see if I was still a man. Suddenly, the curtain was ripped aside with a violent metallic screech. Dr. Miller stood there, his face flushed with anger, holding a clipboard like a weapon. Nurse Parker, I told you to stop playing house in the hallway. Miller hissed, his eyes darting with disgust between the premium towels and the dirty patient. The donor's nephew is here, and he needs this gurney. Now, get this man moved to the loading dock for discharge. He's stable enough to leave. The vulnerable truth hung in the air, a silent bomb waiting to detonate. Samuel didn't say a word. He simply looked at Emily, his eyes asking the final question. Are you brave enough to hold the key? The atmosphere in the hallway fractured. Dr. Miller's hand remained clenched on the curtain, his eyes cold as he waited for Emily to obey. But before she could speak, a wet, gurgling sound erupted from Samuel's chest. His eyes rolled back, and his monitors, the ones Emily had surreptitiously hooked up against orders, began a frantic, rhythmic shrieking. He's in VFib, Emily shouted, her instinct overriding her fear. She dove for the crash cart, her hands moving with practiced precision. Doctor, he needs a shock and an intubation kit now. Dr. Miller didn't move. He glanced at the VIP donor waiting just 10 feet away, then back at the homeless man flatlining in a hallway bed. To Miller, a death in a trauma bay was a tragedy. A death in the hallway was a paperwork nightmare that would delay his promotion. He looked at the clock, then at Samuel's grimy hospital gown. He's a DNR, Miller lied, his voice flat. Look at him, Emily. He's 70, malnourished, and his lungs are shot. Even if we bring him back, he'll be a vegetable. Let him go. It's the most humane thing to do. He is not a DNR. Emily yelled, her voice echoing through the sterile corridor, drawing the eyes of patients and staff alike. Check the chart. There is no order. Miller stepped closer, his voice a low, dangerous snarl. I am the attending physician. I am making a clinical judgment. The survival rate for a patient in his condition is less than 5%. We are not wasting the city's resources on a 5% chance. Call it nurse. Time of death, 14:22. Emily looked from the doctor's cold, handsome face to Samuel's cooling body. This was the biggest moment of tension, the moral crossroads. Miller wasn't just refusing to treat a patient. He was executing him via ego. For a split second, Miller hesitated. He saw the fire in Emily's eyes and the way she gripped the defibrillator paddles. He saw the moral weight of his decision, a flicker of concern crossing his face as he realized others were watching. But the desire for a clean record and a prestigious lunch won. He turned his back on the bed, effectively sealing Samuel's fate. I won't let you do this, Emily whispered, but Miller was already walking away, calling out to the donor's nephew with a charming, deceptive smile. In the silence of Miller's departure, Samuel's hand suddenly clamped onto Emily's wrist with a final, Herculean strength. He wasn't breathing, but his eyes were open, burning with a final message. He pulled her close, his lips barely moving as he wheezed his final words into her ear. The ring. Emily. Fix it. His hand went limp. The long, flat tone of the monitor pierced the air, a high-pitched scream of finality. Samuel Johnson was gone. The hallway became a tunnel of silence, the high-pitched drone of the flatline acting as a funeral dirge that no one else seemed to hear. Dr. Miller was already deep in conversation with the VIP donor, his laughter a sharp, jagged needle in Emily's heart. He didn't even look back as the orderlies arrived to wheel Samuel's body toward the morgue. "Wait," Emily said, her voice shaking but firm. "I'll perform the post-mortem care. I'll prepare him." The orderlies shrugged and moved on to the next crisis, leaving Emily alone with the man who had been a king in a hallway. With trembling hands, she pulled the curtain tight, creating a sanctuary one last time. As she began to straighten Samuel's hospital gown, the object in her pocket grew warm, unusually warm, against her leg. She reached in and pulled it out. It was a heavy, handcrafted signet ring, forged from an unusual, high-carat gold that seemed to catch and amplify the dim light of the hallway. In its center was a deep blue sapphire, etched with the intricate crest of the Johnson Miller Foundation. But as Emily held it, the ring began to pulse with a soft, internal glow. She noticed a tiny, nearly invisible seam along the side of the sapphire. With a soft click, the top of the ring swung open like a locket. Inside was not a photo, but a micro-etched QR code made of platinum and a tiny, rolled sliver of vellum. Emily carefully unfurled the paper. The handwriting was elegant, despite the shaky strokes of a dying man. To the one who saw the man behind the grime, "You have passed the only test that matters. This ring is not just jewelry. It is the majority shareholder's mandate. It carries the digital signature required to override any board decision. I am Samuel Johnson, and as of this moment, I am dead. But through you, the heart of this hospital will beat again. Go to the executive floor. The ring will open the doors. Fix what is broken, Emily. Fire the wolves." Emily looked down at Samuel's face. In death, the lines of pain had smoothed away, replaced by a look of profound peace. He had found what he was looking for. She felt a surge of cold, hard electricity through her veins. The grief was still there, but it was being rapidly overtaken by a sense of righteous purpose. She tucked the glowing ring back into her pocket, the heat of it now acting as a fuel. Outside the curtain, she heard Dr. Miller's voice, arrogant and loud. "Finally, that eyesore is gone. Nurse Parker, quit dawdling and get bed stripped. We have real work to do." Emily stepped out from behind the curtain. She didn't look at the bed. She looked directly into Miller's eyes, and for the first time, she didn't flinch. "You're right, doctor," she said, her voice cold and sharp as a scalpel. "Real work is exactly what's about to happen." The ER hummed with a renewed, cold efficiency. With Samuel's gurney gone, the hallway felt wider, more sterile, and, to Dr. Miller, significantly more professional. He stood by the central desk, sipping a gourmet coffee, the tense unease that had shadowed his face earlier replaced by a smug, victorious calm. He had managed the situation perfectly. The liability was in the morgue, his records were clean, and the hospital donor's nephew was safely tucked into a private room. "See, Emily?" Miller said, not looking at her as he checked his watch. "Efficiency is about knowing which fires to put out and which to let burn. Now, stop moping and get back to." He was cut short by the sound of heavy, rhythmic footsteps, the kind of footsteps that didn't belong to tired residents or frantic patients. The automatic doors slid open, and a phalanx of 3 men in charcoal gray Italian suits marched into the trauma center. They were led by an older man with a silver-topped cane and a face like granite. These weren't doctors. They were the kind of men who bought and sold hospitals before breakfast. Dr. Miller straightened his coat, a practiced, sycophantic smile spreading across his face. "Mr. Sterling? From the legal board? I wasn't expecting an audit today, but as you can see, our ER is running at peak." The man with the cane didn't even break stride. He walked right past Miller's extended hand, his eyes scanning the room with a terrifying intensity. "Where is he?" the man demanded, his voice a low, thunderous growl. "Where is who, sir?" Miller asked, his smile faltering. "If you're referring to the donor's nephew, he's in room 1. I am referring," the lawyer said, stopping dead and turning to face Miller, to Samuel Johnson. the majority owner of this healthcare group. We received a biometric alert from his ring 10 minutes ago. It signaled a final cardiac event. Where is our chairman? The silence that followed was deafening. The coffee cup in Miller's hand shook, the plastic lid rattling. His face went from professional tan to a sickly, translucent white. Chairman, Miller whispered, his voice cracking. The man in the hallway? The man in the hallway, the lawyer repeated, his eyes narrowing. Is the man who pays your salary, Miller? Or rather, the man who did. Emily stepped forward then, the glowing object, in her pocket, now clutched firmly in her hand. She felt the weight of the moment, the transformation from a quiet nurse to the keeper of a kingdom. She looked at the lawyers, then at the trembling, ruined man standing next to them. He's in the morgue holding area, Emily said, her voice steady and clear. And he left a final directive. It's right here. She pulled the signet ring from her pocket. As the lawyers saw the blue sapphire and the glowing internal light, they collectively bowed their heads. Miller looked as if he might faint. The empty bed in the hallway was no longer a vacancy. It was a crime scene of his own making. The ER had frozen into a tableau of shock. Doctors and nurses paused mid-motion, syringes held aloft and charts forgotten, as the gravitas of the lawyer's presence settled over the ward. Mr. Sterling, the lead attorney, moved toward the center of the room, his gaze sweeping over the sterile environment with a look of profound disappointment. 24 hours ago, Sterling announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the trauma center, Samuel Johnson entered this facility as a disguised patient. He wanted to see if the institution he built with his father still possessed a heartbeat, or if it had become a cold machine of profit and ego. He didn't come here to be cured. He came here to be tested. A collective gasp rippled through the staff. The dirty man who had sat in the waiting room for hours, the one they had all stepped over or ignored, was the ghost in their machine. He was the man whose signature was on every paycheck and whose vision had funded every piece of high-tech equipment they used. Dr. Miller's knees buckled, and he caught himself against the nursing station. His tense and uneasy expression from earlier had collapsed into a mask of pure terror. I had no way of knowing, Miller stammered, his voice thin and desperate. He looked like he didn't have insurance. He was uncooperative. He wasn't uncooperative, Andrew, Emily interrupted, her voice cutting through his excuses. He was observant. He didn't need insurance to be treated like a human being. That was the only cooperation he was looking for. Sterling stepped toward Emily, his expression softening into one of immense respect. Nurse Parker, the biometric data from Mr. Johnson's ring recorded everything. His heart rate, his respiratory distress, and his final interactions. It also recorded the moment his attending physician refused to call a code and chose to let him die for the sake of a VIP donor. The lawyers opened a sleek, carbon fiber briefcase, revealing a portable projector that cast a holographic display onto the wall of the ER. It was a live feed of the hospital's internal database, now glowing with a deep blue light. The undercover test is complete, Sterling declared. The results are catastrophic for the leadership of this hospital, but they are hopeful for its future. Samuel Johnson's will was updated via a digital link the moment Nurse Parker took his hand in the hallway. The secret he left behind isn't just money. It's a total restructuring of power. On the wall, Samuel's face appeared in a pre-recorded video, looking healthy and vibrant. If you are seeing this, the recording said, his voice echoing through the silent ward, then I have found the heart I was looking for. Emily Parker is no longer a subordinate. She is the trustee of my estate and the new chair of the ethics committee. Any staff member who failed to treat me with dignity is to be escorted from the premises immediately. The identity was revealed. The dirty patient was the king, and the nurse was now his queen of justice. The atmosphere in the executive boardroom was stifling, a sharp contrast to the cold, sterile air of the ER below. The hospital board members, men and women in tailored suits who had spent years treating patients as line items on a balance sheet, sat in stunned silence. At the head of the table sat an empty chair, the seat Samuel Johnson should have occupied. Emily Parker stood at the threshold, still in her light blue scrubs. She looked out of place among the mahogany and marble, yet as she stepped forward, the glowing signet ring clutched in her hand commanded more authority than any title in the room. Behind her, the legal team stood like a silent honor guard. "This is an outrage," one board member sputtered, slamming a hand on the table. "You can't honestly expect us to hand over the governance of a multi-billion-dollar group to a junior nurse based on the whims of a man who clearly lost his mind at the end." Emily didn't flinch. She walked to the head of the table and placed the ring on the polished wood. The blue sapphire pulsed, and a holographic interface shimmered into existence above the table, displaying the hospital's founding charter. "Samuel didn't lose his mind," Emily said, her voice echoing with a newfound, ironclad resolve. "He found his clarity. He realized that this board had become a parasite on the legacy of his father. You didn't just ignore a dirty patient today. You ignored the very soul of medicine." She swiped her hand through the air, and the data from Samuel's final hours projected onto the walls. The board watched in silence as the footage showed Dr. Miller's cold dismissal, the neglect in the hallway, and finally, the moment of the fatal flatline. The evidence was undeniable. "The bylaws are clear," Mr. Sterling added, his voice like a gavel. "The founder's ring carries the final veto. As the designated trustee, Ms. Parker has the authority to dissolve this board effective immediately." The room erupted in frantic protests, but Emily silenced them with a single look. "I'm not here to negotiate," she said. "I'm here to fulfill a promise. Samuel told me to fix what was broken. That starts with removing the people who think some lives are worth more than others." She looked at the chief of staff, a man who had long turned a blind eye to Dr. Miller's elitism. "Pack your things. All of you. This hospital is going back to being a sanctuary, not a business club." As the board members began to shuffle out, defeated and disgraced, Emily felt a sense of peace wash over her. She looked at the ring, the secret that had changed everything. The transformation was complete. She was no longer just a witness to injustice. She was the architect of a new era. The ER was no longer a place of chaotic neglect. It was a scene of absolute reckoning. Dr. Andrew Miller stood by the nursing station, his hands trembling as he shoved his personal belongings into a cardboard box. The crisp white lab coat that had been his armor now felt like a shroud of his own making. The approachable professional mask had completely shattered, leaving behind a man who looked small, aged, and broken. Emily walked toward him, her footsteps echoing on the polished tiles. She no longer looked like the quiet nurse he could push around. She carried the weight of the hospital's future in her stride. "Emily, please," Miller whispered, his eyes darting around at the staff who were now openly staring. "I've spent 15 years building my reputation. One mistake, one bad day. You can't let them take it all." "It wasn't one mistake, Andrew," Emily said, her voice devoid of malice but heavy with truth. "It was 1,000 small choices to look away from people who couldn't help your career. Samuel didn't die because of a bad day. He died because you decided his life had no value. That's not a mistake. It's a failure of the heart." She reached out and took the stethoscope from around his neck, the same one he had used to ignore the rhythm of a dying king. "You're a talented doctor, Andrew, but you've forgotten how to be a human. Maybe now, without the title, you'll find your way back." As security escorted Miller toward the sliding glass doors, Emily turned to the gathered staff. The ER was silent. She pulled the glowing signet ring from her pocket and held it up. "Starting today," she announced, her voice ringing with the quiet dignity she had learned from Samuel, "this hospital will no longer have a hallway for the invisible. There are no level 5 humans here. From the CEO to the custodial staff, we will treat every person who walks through those doors like royalty. Because you never know when you might be entertaining a king." She looked toward bed 4. It was empty now, freshly made with the premium white linen Samuel had deserved from the start. A single, small plaque was already being installed on the wall beside it, the Samuel Johnson Sanctuary. Emily felt the warmth of the ring one last time before she tucked it away. The secret was out, the wolves were gone, and for the first time in 50 years, The heartbeat of the hospital was strong, steady, and true.